some great work that's going to be presented. So I appreciate during this incredibly busy time everyone's opportunity here to come down here and take the time out. And I recognize that with 2 weeks left in the semester, it is an incredibly busy time for everyone. So I'd also like to call attention to the final lecture in the lecture series, which will be Monday night. And that's going to be Bernardo Fortbregia from Architectonica out in Miami, Florida. And that's an 8 p.m. lecture. So I hope to see a lot of you back on Monday night. I'd also like to, again, recognize and thank the student sponsor, and this happens to be Kara Moeller, who has helped with the reception that will follow the lecture. And also Paul Howie, who has done the kind of before reception, which many of us has already taken advantage of and filled our pockets with some munchies. So those are great events that we have, and thanks to the Students' Initiative. At this time, I'd like to introduce Professor Michel Mounayar to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to what I think is going to be a great lecture. I have the pleasure of introducing to you Mr. Bradley Lynch, and I would like to read a little bit from his sort of resume. Mr. Lynch attended undergraduate school at the University of Wisconsin and is a member of a number of professional and cultural organizations. He was a finalist and received the honorable mention for the 1995 Burnham Prize for Architecture. Brad Lynch met Mr. Brunstuhl at Papa George and Hames, where he worked as a project architect. Previously, Mr. Lynch was principal of a Wisconsin design build firm called Envelope, which was involved in the restoration and renovation of Frank Lloyd Wright and Prairie School building in Wisconsin and Illinois, as well as original residential and commercial design. In addition, he was a project and construction manager for the restoration of the Huber Jacobs House, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright in 1937, and now a national landmark. The project received a number of awards, including a Distinguished Building Award from the American Institute of Architects, Chicago, and has been widely published. On another note, Bradley is a friend, and I would like you to join me in welcoming him to Ball State University. I present to you Mr. Brad Lynch.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks very much. And I am from Chicago, and I do have a laser up here, but I promise you I'm not going to point it at anybody out there today. I'd just like to say I've been having this incredible fantasy that I have to tell you about. And it kind of goes like this. I have this lovely assistant or assistants at work, and they enter a conference room of waiting clients about 5 minutes before I do. They serve the clients chocolate truffles and cappuccino from our kitchen's $25,000 imported cappuccino maker. The assistants proceed to inform the clients that Mr. Lynch is in a difficult mood and they should not bring up any conversation about money in any shape or form, not in regard to budget, fee, or anything else. They should talk to me only about aesthetics and architecture as art and not get to any pesky details about programmatic concerns or if the $1,000 faucet is going to fit onto the custom kitchen sink. The assistants tell the clients that Mr. Lynch will present his conceptual ideas, his philosophy behind them, and will then give the opportunity to ask for clarification of ideas, which should not be confused with asking specific questions about the work. Well, like all great fantasies, I wake up having overslept, realizing they have a meeting at work in 30 minutes, take a cold shower while quickly relieving my fantasy. The shower is cold because when the kids flush the toilet in our only bathroom, we lose the hot water for about 3 minutes as part of what my wife described as the cobbler's family syndrome. I just call it mañana, and this is what I mean when I say within context. So when I talk about context, my view of context is not something that I am sure that Mayor Daley, Prince Charles, or Leon Crew would necessarily understand, but one that I hope to represent here to you today. The work that I am presenting while generated from wildly dissimilar program requirements, demonstrates what I hope is an underlying consistency of design as well as an evolution of our work over the past 10 years. To give you an overview of our work, what I'm going to do is show you a group of slides in general that represent some of our common goals and approach. Other than the first pair that I show, basically none of the slides are matched to a specific project, and it's just to give you an idea of some themes that go through our work that I think are relatively consistent. And then I will show you 4 projects, actually 5, I added one at the last minute, that I'll talk about specifically after those. And I kind of will talk about how they represent context in terms of what I mean in terms of context for each individual project. There's 3 main themes that run through our work that I think that are important, and they include recognizing the importance of size and vernacular influences, site and vernacular influences, while not succumbing to them. Placing great importance on knowing how materials can go together in detail. Selection of materials are meant to evoke both stability and comfort, as well as maintain compatibility and affordability, though not by the imitation of other materials. And probably most important is anticipation. While clearly defining an intended function, we feel it is important to create a sense of anticipation from one space to another by the manipulation of natural and artificial light and the juxtaposition of architectural volumes. And so I'll start with facades in general and just move through these first slides rather quickly. And this is what I call outside in. Inside out. Meeting places and congregation areas. Transition. The Ingleneck. kitchen. Translucency. And details. This is the first project I want to talk about, which I understand Ball State went to, a group from Ball State went to Roscoe Village in Chicago about a year and a half ago. And I remembered that, and I wanted to bring this because this is actually in Roscoe Village. Is that focused? There we go. And this will be my first example in context of basically in 3 different levels. One, this is probably about 9 years ago that we did this job, and this is pretty typical of a lot of the rehab work that we were doing in residential work at the time in Chicago. We don't do that much anymore. And the program was that there was a single woman who was a doctor, and she painted in her spare time. And basically, she wanted something that was in that neighborhood specifically, something that would be light and airy, and that would give her a studio to paint in, but still would have some type of resale value if she decided to move in about 5 years. Part of what was going on in that neighborhood was that there was a lot of gentrification going on, probably starting in the early 90s. The neighborhood to the south of it and the neighborhood to the north of it had already become fairly stable, and this was an up-and-coming area. So at looking at the existing building, what you see on the left, which was a typical 2-story, 2-flat with an attic up above, the context in terms of the neighborhood was that we decided that rather than doing something that was going to, most of the houses looked like traditional turn-of-the-century clapboard Chicago-style houses. We wanted to basically not disrupt that context of the block of the neighborhood by adding something that was completely different. The quality of them was fairly consistent. So we decided to basically restore the facade as is, gut the interior entirely, and then do something in the back that reflected both the materials that we're using on the front and then give some sense of anticipation in terms of what was going on in the interior. So basically the basement, which had been a garden apartment, was renovated just to have a recreation, storage, utility down there. As you come in the front door, it's also a fairly narrow lot. It was 24 feet, and the house is 19 feet wide. We wanted to keep the structure in terms of zoning and code in Chicago, working with that. So we didn't want to enlarge the width or extend anything in terms of the rear. The stair was left fairly open. It's an open stair going up to the 2nd floor and the 3rd level, which we did as a painting studio up in the 3rd level. Jumping up to the 3rd level, we added dormers in to get northern light into the studio, lowered the floor area over the 2 bathrooms on the 2nd floor and the stairwell there so we get headroom clearance on the third floor. Basically a simple core plumbing plan, 3 bedrooms on the second floor, which gives it the resaleability, and then a fairly open plan on the first floor. And part of what we try and do is, particular in smaller houses, is keep the ceilings. We use that to define the space, disguise our lighting or hide our lighting, to manipulate the light sources that are coming in there, but also define how you progress through the space and also define functional areas within the house. So as you can see, we did a very turn-of-the-century facade on here. The back is reflecting more of what we did in the interior. What you're seeing here is, again, what I'm talking about is layering of these soffits. We had a main structure to pick up the load of the bearing wall that used to be in there. So we ran steel posts down into the basement into new footings, did composite angle columns up above that, and then ran the beam exposed between those 2 columns. Since we were doing that in steel, we decided to do all the other elements that had to do with stair and structure support down there also in steel. The curved wall that you see was to give a foil in terms of an entrance into the bathroom area. And that's done in a waxed Venetian stucco. And then the kitchen and dining room area are very small, and she didn't want a formal dining area, so we just designed the table to fit into a wall that divided the kitchen, but would give you a view over the table into the backyard, which we also landscaped. And the glass on the right that you're seeing then gives a screen, a little definition to the stair going down to the downstairs. This house was a few years later, and this is in the neighborhood of Bucktown in Chicago. And the story behind this was that the owner came to us and wanted to buy a house in Bucktown to rehab, to totally gut rehab. And basically Bucktown is an area that has exploded over the years in real estate value. At the time, this was probably 1993 that we're talking about initial talks. The idea of buying a house in Bucktown was becoming very popular. It was an alternative to Lincoln Park and Western Lincoln Park area. And it was an area that a lot of artists had moved into and kind of got the whole action going of restaurants moving in and that type of thing. It was very inexpensive originally. Lots were selling, even in the 80s, for $5,000, $6,000. What had happened is that but it was a gang-infested neighborhood. It was rough living there. What happened fairly quickly was that people started purchasing real estate there, and the prices rose for existing real estate very quickly. The building stock in this neighborhood was horrible, but people found it quaint, and all of a sudden we're paying $165,000 for a house to be gut rehabbed. These people came to us and said, we'd like to get one of these houses and gut rehab it. And I said, well, it's kind of preposterous because there's not much left to work with in dealing this house. You can still buy a lot over there for $55,000 and build a new house cheaper than you can actually rehabbing it. So that's actually how we ended up doing that. This is a very inexpensive house. This was a small lot, 24 feet by 121. And in the city of Chicago, you have to be back 3 feet unless you're completely 3-hour fire protected. We wanted to preserve every inch of space in this house. So the idea of using exposed cinder block came actually from a functional reason as opposed to just the aesthetic of using the cinder block. We used a double white wall with rigid insulation in between. And also this lot is one of these lots where you step down 4 feet down to grade of the lot as opposed to being right off street level. So the idea was to have the living areas on the second floor with the greatest amount of width in them. You enter in on the basement level and then walk up the stairs and the living room is in the rear. The central core, which houses plumbing, HVAC core, all that type of thing, is in the center, and that divides to the dining room. And then upstairs, of course, is the bedrooms. One of the things in terms of light on a lot of this size, and also what you're looking at in the city, is you want to manipulate what you're going to look at, but you also want to get a great amount of natural light within the space. That's part of the reason the living room is in the rear of the house as opposed to the front of the house. In Chicago, most of the townhomes you see, all the living rooms go into the front, but the ironic part is that no one will open their draperies because they don't want to see anything that's going out onto the street. That's part of the reason that we did it, because we could landscape the back, kind of create their own environment back there. Then the problem is, how do you deal with light getting into the house, and rather cheaply? So on the south side of the house, we knew that there was going to be another, because of the real estate, burgeoning real estate market that was going on, we knew that there was going to be a house that would be built there. So we decided to just have these great openings, use standard cow wall panels that you see used on industrial buildings all the time, use those inserted on there. They're on the south side, so even if somebody built a house there, we'd still get the south ambient light through the walkway. And additionally, what we did then is add poster lights to the outside of the building that illuminated both the walkway and the translucent panels, so that at nighttime you would still have this translucency going on with the screens in there. And this is it under construction. It's very simple. We have a couple of major steel columns. I shouldn't say major, some steel running through the middle between the cow wall panels going up, so that we don't, for a moment connection there. And then basically we just have the basic cinder block walls and clear span trusses, so that we don't have to worry about any interior walls. Very easy to put together, very simple. So once you have that structure, you can basically manipulate any of your interior spaces easily within that. On the second story, we just used bowstring trusses, mainly because of the price. They were so cheap. And then we added a prefab skylight, barrel skylight, that ran through the opening between the living room and the second floor. So it became additional light on the second floor that floated down, kind of moved down to the living room area. So this is it complete in the front, before a house is built there on the right, and then the rear yard. Again, on the left, you can see how the panels are lit from the outside in the empty lot, and then this is taken on the right after a house is built there, not too long afterwards. Here we were concerned about context in terms of historical design on the outside. Basically, we chose our forms on the outside purely for economical reasons. What could we do just for the cost that we're dealing with? Because the building types were so poor in this neighborhood that we didn't feel that we had to concern ourselves with any historical context whatsoever. You enter in down here, and this is where you enter up, just to the other side of the wood wall in front of the cow wall panel. This is a completely different type of project. This is a bank that we've been working on for probably 3 years. Not because we wanted to, just because it's been dragging on and on and on and on, mainly because of the owner of the bank. And this has to do with context on many different levels. It has to do with working with kind of an eccentric client. It has to do working with an existing building on a prominent north side corner. And it has to do with working with City Hall, which in this case proved to be extremely difficult. The idea here was that this is a medium-sized bank, and by medium-sized I mean about a $4 billion bank. It's one of the larger if not the largest privately owned bank now in Chicago. And they had 11 banks that they decided to merge under one name. They wanted to use an existing property in the city to use then as their corporate headquarters. And this is the building they decided on, which is already being used as Lincoln National Bank. They changed the name to Chorus. And the idea was that we would put the corporate headquarters up on the third floor, the third, fourth, and fifth floor. And then we would do some historical work to the existing lobby on the first floors. And then on the outside of the building, the job would be to completely restore the outside to what it was basically in the 1920s. There's a lot of canopies that were added to the building, the clock, smoked glass windows with dark aluminum frames, and then those are the original windows upstairs. It's a V-shaped building with, on the upper 3 floors, and then the first and second floor have a grand lobby with a skylight, hence the V in terms of the plan. The CEO actually was a big fan of modern architecture, and he didn't see the problem in terms of, or he didn't see any problem in terms of having a very modern interior on the upper floors, and also in context of that he wanted to build an addition to this building to house expansion for the corporate headquarters in a very modern building just to the right of this building on this left-hand side. This is after we worked on the outside of the building. Not much to show. And then we were going to add another addition onto the other side of the V shape of the building to the east side, which is shown in the right slide. This is a typical plan of how this fits together. Within this existing building, there's an apex of an existing stair, elevator core, and mechanical core. And again, this building was built during the 1920s, so we had to deal with a lot of pre-existing conditions and limitations in terms of bringing mechanical up. In a building like this, in resolving a project like this, it is a little difficult, more difficult than it looks, because with a bank and with the type of headquarters and machinery that they have in there, and for the fact that the CEO almost fired the president of one of his banks because the air conditioning wasn't working one day, HVAC is a very critical issue. And the ceiling height clear from floor to ceiling is 10 feet with concrete. So one of the things that I thought would be nice is that if we opened up this space, you'd have an unusual environment, certainly in the city of Chicago, where you could have a building that's narrow enough that you could open up views from both sides in terms of natural light. Previously, there was a corridor running through the center of the building. So the idea is how are we going to deal with the mechanical issue? How are we going to deal with lighting? How are we going to do communications within the ceiling area? And the idea was to lower a soffit area, put all the mechanical and distribution in there, have that as the basis for ambient light distribution, and then keep the floor plate completely open that way, all the way to the original ceiling at the perimeter. We would then connect that soffit or lower ceiling into the new addition, which had new elevator core, bathrooms, that sort of thing, which is going to be executive offices, large executive offices in that space. The problem with the city came when we didn't want to do a building that looked just like the old one. Both the owner and we agreed that just because there is a, does this look focused, by the way? I can't really tell from here. They thought, anyway, the city thought that the new building should look just like the old one in historical context to it. We adamantly disagreed. We probably went through 50 detailed elevation renderings showing them how bad it looked. trying to add on something that was never going to match in material, wasn't going to match in character, was just going to make this a behemoth, and that somehow we could deal with the scale by connecting a modern structure. And this one is actually going to be constructed out of glass that's on a stainless steel curtain wall. And then what you're seeing down in the base on the right is layers of granite and concrete to get into the lobby there. Also, what you're seeing a shadow of kind of an opening that's behind the glass is that we have to separate the stairway away from the facade for fire code reasons. And so we have a closure that floats behind the glass for the fire stair that floats in front of the elevator corridor. And we decided to express that behind the glass. There, you can see more there. The kind of textured material that you see inside the lobby is Corten steel. And this is under the ceiling. If you were under the ceiling of the lobby, these are all computer generated. This is the now finished interior of the existing building. As you can see, we use the central core soffit as the mechanical lighting area. We run all the mechanical out of that little slit that runs again on the top of the ceiling there, so that none of the diffusers or grillwork is exposed. The second tier is for fluorescent lighting. And then the spine, as we call it, that's running down the center, is then giving the corridor lighting, which are all removable panels to access the mechanical equipment. They decided to go with predominantly open workstation areas and then have conference rooms as meeting rooms, as opposed to dividing up with offices. These are small meeting rooms off to the side, and then this is the end of the apex going down to one of those meeting rooms. Now, the unfortunate part is that they've postponed the new building for another year, so that probably won't be done for another 2 or 3 years now. So it's an ongoing project. This is in Racine, Wisconsin, the Wisdom Art Museum. And this is another ongoing project. And I kind of need to tell the story about it in the sense of what it means for the community and what's going on there. They are in a predicament that most museums don't have. Usually in this country, museums build and assume the art will come. The predicament this museum has is that it actually has probably the finest collection of 20th century modern craft works in the world. It's all stored off a site in like U-Haul places because they have no room to put it anywhere in the museum. And the interesting thing is that it's also a very community-oriented museum in the sense that they have kindergarten to adult art classes, which they've had there since the 1920s. They ran a lot of WPA programs during the 30s there. And they have guest artist programs that come in that work with out of school, junior high school and high school kids who are in gangs or are parentless, and they have paper makers come in to work with the kids to tell their story and then set it in type and then make their own books and paper. So there's kind of an interesting community history to it as well. The problem is that there's an original farmhouse that was donated by the Wisdoms at the turn of the century in the grounds, and then they kept adding these really bad additions to it, and it's just a mess. So the idea was, how can we approach this new museum, still keep it the house which everybody loves in the community, as a vehicle, visual vehicle anyway, in the front of the grounds, so that people still have the sense that it's the old Wisdom, not to erase that. And basically we worked out a program. These are the back of the ground, so they're actually very nice. They flow down to a valley and then down to the river. Well landscaped. We worked out a program of that actually ended up being 100,000 square feet for the museum, and that included a auditorium, included a main exhibition gallery, it included a permanent collection exhibition gallery, it included a light-sensitive gallery, it included the classrooms, and the idea was to, again, use the house, restore it back exterior-wise to its original condition. And we thought the only use, because of its size, that we could really make for it was actually a media library and library. And we were going to, exterior-wise, restore the outside of the house, gut the interior of it, because there's basically nothing left of the original interior, put a steel structure core in it that includes an elevator and a wrapped around steel stair, and then have platforms of stacks and computer data terminals in there for information in terms of museum data and library. It is then connected to the museum, the new museum, by an underground tunnel, which then gets into a very large storage and viewing area, collections area, prep rooms, carpentry shop, that type of thing. We get up to the first floor, and that's kind of critical in terms of how we laid it out to the site. There is a building that exists that's what they call the Theater Guild, which is directly to the north of it, just above where those trees are indicated. And we really needed to make that building disappear as much as we could in terms of the entry of the museum. So as you enter this museum in the new door, you bypass a series of steps that go down gradually, I would say probably 18, 20 feet down to the step in the landscape that you saw before in the photo slides. As you walk in, it's a two-story area, and then you proceed either to the permanent galleries, which have views out to the outside and are separated by free-floating walls that you can hang craft works and so forth on those walls. Or you can go to the permanent gallery, which then brings you back to heads back to a small public dining area, kitchen, and then also the school. Any access that you see in here on the plan actually connect to views outside. So the one that's running through the permanent gallery on the top is looking through a window out to a level for outdoor sculpture. So as you're walking through the gallery on one side, you look to your right, that view is then picture framed out to outdoor sculpture on that walk. You look the other way, the view is picture framed out to an outdoor terrace where we have a fountain area and Richard Serra sculpture. We were thinking not there. Second floor is just basically half-story areas above the main gallery areas. Office areas on the second floor, conference room, and lookouts down to the permanent gallery, and then more classrooms, top of the atrium, and then the roof plan. Here you can see it in section. The front elevation, which is the top left, the northeast, is it's poured concrete, limestone block on the higher wall, all glass facade into the entry, and then the wall that you're seeing, the darker area, is a cast aluminum. Back elevation, classrooms. These doors on the bottom open up into outdoor ceramic kilns and glass blowing kilns. And then on the other side, you get an idea of how the gallery areas are divided from the circulation areas and the office areas on the second floor. And then also how your views are articulated out to the outdoor sculpture walk. Another sectional view, another elevation. The house as it is, now we're projecting it to work with the entry. The facade entry, I mean, in terms of the new building, has to work, as far as we're concerned, not just as a piece into itself, but how it would be the backdrop to the original house. This is the main exhibition gallery with a floating wall that runs on the left-hand side there. And then the light source is skylights above on the roof. And then we have a nylon sail screen that runs on tracks that ran on the surface of those tracks, which is also where the track lighting was housed. And you can see the exhibit area there for crafts, which also blocks the light from the terrace. And then out in the terrace area. And that brings me to a house that we're doing in Indianapolis. And this couple, who are empty nesters in their 50s, decided, they saw one of our houses in a magazine and decided they wanted to build one down in Indianapolis. And he's Japanese and American, and she's Anglo. And the only reason I mention that is because he has quite an extensive Japanese art collection and very much into Oriental art. And actually has 2 pairs of 17th century screens, which he determined were to be the focal point of the house. The dichotomy in this project is that they're both avid golfers. They've been living in Indianapolis for a while, and they wanted to pick a lot in a developer's development, which I really can understand. But that's what we were left to deal with. Yet they still wanted this very contemporary house, a Japanese garden outside, or at least a facsimile, a Japanese influence garden, I should say. So we ended up finding this property in one of these developments, and as part of this development, this is before anything has been built anywhere near the lot, but this is basically the lot, and it's beautiful. It's got a lot of trees. It's a sloping site, but part of the development is that you're mandated to take a boat dock. And unbeknownst to me, I didn't even know there was water down in Indianapolis, but there's a yacht club there. And then as if you take this dock, you have you're instructed to take a golf cart. In fact, it's part of the deed that you have to have a golf cart to ride down to the dock on. And so you have to have a third place to park the golf cart, even though they're never going to use it, or the dock, they just have it. But the types of houses that are going up in this development are so dissimilar to what we're building there that it's stupefying almost. So the objective is to hide this house as much as we could for the views, seeing this, preserving this type of view, and then kind of blocking the entry by sequencing from the street the rest of the houses that are being built there. I'm sure you've all seen these neighborhoods. We ended up going through 2 design phases because of what the project ended up costing was more than they wanted to spend for the original design that we had. And the interesting thing is that I think it turned out to be better that they gave us more financial restrictions and we went back and redesigned the house. The cul-de-sac, the classic cul-de-sac, and at the end of it, this site is sloping approximately 15 feet overall. And the idea was to put the garage as close to the front of the street as setback lines as possible, have a gate so that you basically enter into this courtyard, and a 1-story volume would block then the view into the rear yard area, which would house the living room, and that would only be, in terms of light coming into that, would only be clear story light. And you have a 2-story volume which would house the main core, the bedrooms, bathrooms, that sort of thing, kind of juxtaposed between that and the garage. And that way, your privacy is created by this sequence of going to this courtyard. And the little squiggly lines that you see there are the Japanese screens. And then the view would be either then to the outside, in terms of the view out into the landscape, or to the Japanese screens. The materials were mandated by the developer that they had to be red brick, and if you were to use wood siding, it had to be limited. So this is still the first design. We just did some 3D study models on it. And then the interior with the fireplace, and then the backyard. This was the second solution, and there you see some of the new houses going up on the right there. And the foundation that you see on the right is actually the foundation for the garage. It's under construction now. But the idea was to keep this house as simple as possible a structure, because part of the problem was getting somebody to understand how we wanted the thing built down there and still meet our budget. And so my idea was to still keep the sequence, but have it as a 2-story volume, keep it very simple, clear span trusses through the house, divide up the interior space, much like you saw the first concrete block divided up, then add a foil of just a site wall out of brick to block the view back into the rear yard, have a sequence of steps on the left of that volume, and then just have a cantilevered section over the entry to act as a foil against that volume. So another view, different view of the site, same site obviously, but as you come in, you still have this courtyard effect. The brick wall is blocking the view, giving a sense of privacy and courtyard effect and sequence as you're coming in. Again, this idea of the sense of anticipation, what's next, what goes down there. And on the outside, you step down into what we've developed as a koi pond area, and basically we're leaving everything on the site, naturally landscapes, except for trees that we're planting at strategic areas. So there'll be hopefully not a blade of grass on the site. And then we have the paved courtyard on the, out of concrete, limestone, and slate. The koi pond is in the center with that little circular element there. Your view out of the basement area, which is an entertainment area, is so that you can use that as entertainment and go directly out onto that terrace area, and is accessible from a stairway walking behind that brick wall. One of the guest bedrooms is downstairs. The mechanical room is to the far right. I keep turning this off, I'm sorry. The entry, again, is very simple in terms of structure, but sequencing it in terms of manipulation of ceiling height and volumes once you get into the space. So as soon as you come in, the front door, which is nestled a little bit behind the brick wall, you have 2 views. One is directly out to the little creek view that I showed you in the first photographs in that pictured window, You turn to the right, there's another window in front of the stairway that again articulates a tree out in that area. All the cabinets for the kitchen area are in the first area that you walk in, the hallway, are all approximately 8 feet in height with a 10-foot ceiling. So they're all held down below the ceiling. They're non-structural, so they're almost volumetric elements within the space to help define these corridors. And then a lowered ceiling area once you're within the kitchen. That's also where we tuck all the lighting in order to give it an ambient light source within that area. The screens are again positioned parallel to the openings to the view, so that you're either looking at the screens or you're looking at the view. And then the fireplace is articulated next to that picture window that shows you the view there. Upstairs, a very generous master bedroom area with all built-in cabinets, woodwork, walk-in closet. The bathroom floors are all out of slate. It's all floor-to-ceiling glass windows on the outside of this, which you're seeing in terms of the two big openings. And that's both on the first and the second floor, and behind it is translucent glass that then gives you a sense of privacy when you're in the bathroom, but is bringing the natural light into it as you're in there. And then the tub area is a Japanese wood tub that is filled up and this lets out onto the floor, what you see in there, and then the other guest bedroom is in there. That is the rear view from the creek view as we were seeing before, the front. Again, we're just using brick because we had to, and wood siding as to divide the volumes. It's just a straight wood siding. Wood siding on the east elevation. And we have scuppers in the roof. It's a flat roof. The scuppers drain the water off the roof onto this lower roof level and then drain off into one central downspout. In terms of materials, what we did is offset the brick types. We used two different brick colors that were subtly different from each other. And then the darker one we used in the recessed area that you see in the elevation. And here's the revised interior. This is looking from the living room back into the kitchen. There you see the Japanese screens. Here's the view, which I call the sequence into the front entry. And then also on the left side of that canopy, it's all open so that it's a screen more of an arbor effect there. And then you're looking at the koi pond up to the windows there. Yesterday I was at the site and the carpenter had put Texaco on the drawings in the trailer, which I thought was pretty funny. You want to see one more? Okay. This I thought I would tell you about because this basically tells the story of how we get a job or don't get a job, as the case may be, and kind of tells you the process of how we work and design. About a month ago, I got a email message from a guy in Madison, Wisconsin, who had seen our website, and his message was, and it was a company I'd never heard of, and a financial company, and his message was, I really liked your website, and we're looking for a very innovative, creative architecture firm to design us a new corporate headquarters. And I got to tell you, this is like, you would normally ignore a message like this because you just don't get messages like this in the real world. And the more I investigated it, the more interesting it sounded. It's actually they are very soft-spoken firm in Madison. They are very financially conservative, but they had a lot of money, as it turns out, and or manage a lot of money, I should say. And So we investigated a little further, and so I decided to go up and visit them, because they had just sent me then a program, an RFP about going out to 5 firms, us and one of us, we were one of them, about how they wanted to approach this. And this RFP was nothing like I'd ever seen, coming from a business before, in the sense that in the real world, you get an RFP and it's telling you exactly how they want, it's 25 pages of exactly how they want everything laid out, how much money they're going to spend, who you're going to contact with, listing all consultants, basically the whole schedule, what's your fee, when are you going to get paid, when do we have to pay you, what type of contracts you're going to use, this type of thing. This was 3 pages, and they were talking about, we were thinking about what are your ideas about fitting a building into a unique site? What's your design philosophy? All this type of thing. And it's like, again, these are just questions you don't get normally from businesses wanting to do a building. So I take one of the guys that works in the office with us, project architect Pablo Diaz, and we decided to drive up to Madison and go meet them and talk to them. Now, again, to put this in another sense of context, the week before, I had met with 2 of the largest commercial real estate brokers in Chicago, and a guy who specializes in communication arts and communications and business. And the reason I met with them is because I wanted them to tutor me on how to better deal with making business presentations in front of large corporations for commercial work. And so what they did is, I did a presentation, how I typically do it for, say we want to do an office interior, something like that, or work on a corporate headquarters, and basically they spent 3 hours, tearing me apart and said, no, you can't do this, and basically giving me the Dale Carnegie lesson about how to, present yourself in a corporate boardroom. And so you got to realize this is the week before, so I'm all prepared to deal with all the business aspects of going to talk to these people in Madison. And so we go to their office, and ironically, they're in the bottom floor of a building that's owned by an architectural firm. And so I'm getting a little weary about what's going on, and they go in and talk to the CEO of the firm, and he's a very laid-back guy. He's wearing blue jeans, and we didn't realize that the Badgers were playing at that hour in the NCAA finals, so we were kind of disrupting things as we walked in. And but he spent some minutes with us, and I could not pry any information out of this guy. And in terms of trying to get well, when you say innovative, what do you mean by that? Do you mean is Frank Gehry or Richard Meyer? And he goes, well, no, not necessarily. Although I have a Richard Meyer-like house, and I think perhaps Frank Gehry might be too extreme for some of the people here. And you got to realize that somebody in the business world who even knows who those 2 people are is a big step. So talking to him more, he goes, I'm trying to fish for all this information, particularly in context that I've just had this lecture about how I should behave dealing with corporate people the week before. And finally he interrupts me, and I'm asking things, well, should we be sending you a proposal book before we come for our meeting? Because the idea was that we were going to do a presentation from them in about a month with the other 5 firms, all in a period of a few days. So he goes, don't worry about any of that stuff. I don't want you to worry about budget. I don't want you to worry about how you're going to deal with it. I assume that you know how to deal with all this stuff. That's why we called you. And I go, okay. And I was dumbfounded. I was absolutely dumbfounded. It was like, this guy could not be for real. And he certainly kept a very good secret. I mean, I couldn't pry any information on him. So we went over to the site, and this is the site, and it's in a research park And it curves along this road. And all these buildings have been built, mostly by Madison architectural firms, to face the road with their windows facing the road. But the interesting thing was that they went to great lengths. It's actually owned by the university, the land, to landscape it in such a way that a lot of the original trees that were in these rolling hills were preserved. A lot of the prairie landscaping was preserved, but yet then everybody would focus their attention to this road. And I looked at the site, I went over there, and I got really interested in it. And this is these are basically what you're looking at when you're looking out at the road, and it's very kind of turns and almost in a perfect radius at one point. But this is the other view. And it's a 5-acre site, and it has almost this piece of a pie type shape of it, and it all centrally focuses on this clump of pine trees, drops down 25 feet on the site, and then there's a group of oaks over there. And to finish my story about how we're going to deal with this guy, we basically had a month to prepare what our presentation was going to be. And unless somebody's hired us, we normally go in and make a presentation, wait for them to hire us before we design anything. It's the old game of people want work for free. So I like to say we like to pick and choose our charities. So we go back and think about this, and I knew exactly the moment that I was on that site what this building was going to look like. We're really busy at the firm, and then of course our meeting was this past Monday up there, and we started preparing for this Wednesday, the week before, actually Tuesday night. I usually go to a bar on Tuesday night and do my napkin research. So we had from Wednesday to figure out how we're going to do this presentation, and we basically decided that we're going to present an idea because we had no idea how to answer this guy. He says, tell us our design philosophy, how you approach architecture. Well, the only way to really do it was to address the site. But this gives you a good idea of how we work, because we do everything last minute just like you do. And we went in, we basically showed them the same slides, and we said, do you want to look at those buildings that we showed you, or do you want to look at these trees? And this is the wintertime. You should never look at a site, by the way, in the summertime, living in the Midwest or in the Northern Hemisphere. I don't know if your professors have told you this already. You can always make a site look pretty by putting a lot of green on it, but you should always design for the wintertime because you're living in it, at least where I do, 6 months out of the year. So it was good that we went up there where there was still snow on the ground. It just melted the other day. So I envisioned this, that in terms of their program, which is about 30,000 square feet that they needed, they wanted a very open office environment. Some senior key people would have private offices, but they wanted interlinked with the support staff. They're all very athletic, and they wanted a gym on the site. And one of the things they were worried about was parking, because they wanted to preserve as much of this landscape as possible. And everybody else in this development had done a paved parking lot. And for the amount of cars that were done, that they needed per square footage, it would have covered a lot of the lot. And so I envisioned this is the view. You want to see this view, the sense of being out in this environment, this landscaped environment, from no matter where you stand in the building, no matter what you're doing, no matter who's coming in. This is the focal point. Why else would you want a lot that's landscaped with some of the original landscape that's on the lot except to have this view? You don't want to look at those ugly buildings across the street. So there's two things that I thought of when I saw this site. And one of them was this road, because it basically had the same curve. I thought of a rock formation, a natural quarry formation, because I think that's something that goes with the texture of the rock fitting into the elevation of the site and the curve of the site. And then I also thought of the texture of the stone. This happens to be a very good stonemason job that was done on the Pugh House by Frank Lloyd Wright with a stone mantle. And that was kind of like the material idea for me. This was the Tuesday night sketches of the napkins. And the idea was there's the trees in the left and the center. There's the building. You want to create the building, kind of slide it into the site. So on the far end where the elevation is high, it disappears in the site with a stone wall. You keep a translucency with clear story windows above the stone wall, which is a separate structure. Then you move in to a plaza area, which is the focal entrance point. It's Wisconsin. You need a silo, a corn crib. So we have a corn crib which houses a ramp down to a parking lot so that you don't underneath the building, so you don't have to deal with blacktopping half the site for the parking. And then above it, above the ramp, you put the gym. And so from Tuesday night on these sketches until our presentation on Monday, this is basically, we'll go really quickly from really drawing really rough sketches into computer models. We don't do a lot of in between because we come up something, we try and know exactly where we're going to be headed for it. But this is the topographic site. There's the bend in the road. See the trees, the oak trees up on the top. All the view is articulated to the trees. We've got a shallow pond that sits in front of this floor-to-ceiling glass, and we've all faceted the glass, so the glass is all on an angle between column spans and inverted so that we don't have glare on it. There's a little bridge to an observation pavilion across from it, and then we created a very rectilinear plaza against a concrete entrance structure, and then the ramp, how you get down into the parking under this building, is then in that silo. The rectangular foil that pierces the silo is then the locker room, the bathrooms, and the fire stair that get out of the building. How you get out of the parking lot is not going back up the ramp, but out at the end of the building, which brings you up to the grade at that end, and that's also where the loading dock is. And in these Axon site plans, you can see how the glass curtain wall works over the pond, and then creating this sense of entry out of that elevation and how the landscape turns there. And that's what we presented. And they were all smiling afterwards, and they said they'd let us know by the end of the month. And that's another thing about anticipation. So thank you. Thanks for coming down today.